The year is now 114 post-Draconis in Auckton, a mere 7 years since we last visited, and yet another revolution has overtaken the city. This time, however, the force of change is not the emboldened masses revolting against an oppressive regime, nor the wealthy aristocracy throwing off their ties to their superiors in the name of profits, but one driven by coal, iron, and blood. Far across the Saris Ocean lies the former colonial masters of Auckton, the greater kingdom of Frostock. Decimated by the Draconic Wars and exhausted by the Tarath Spring, Frostock spent the last century struggling to rebuild from the ground up. Forced to contend with being cut off from the lucrative resources exploited by the colonies, life in Frostock was a meager one, guided by one's attempt to secure their next meal. Yet, in the year 110 post-Draconis, one Arthur Black begins to ignite a fire under the invention that would forever change the world. A tailor by trade and the son of a blacksmith, Arthur Black barely managed to produce a handful of garments every week. Despite the availability of cheap cotton, it was simply too costly to employ a large workforce to manufacture clothing, as most labor had to go to the fields. As the fire underneath the large metal tank begins to build, a pressure gauge begins to rise. Arthur looks up from the fire and closes the door to the firebox, before turning a small valve and giving a nearby wheel a gentle nudge. Suddenly, his toy begins to roar to life. Slowly at first, but then faster and faster. His simple side project begins to shake the entire house as steam belches out of a piston at its apex, before quickly falling back down. The wheel he gave a nudge to just moments before was now rotating at dizzying rates, the air audibly whirring around it. He steps back and laughs. In the year 110 post-Draconis, Arthur Black had invented the steam engine. It did not take long for this new invention to become extremely widespread. It was obvious how versatile and useful this machine would be. Within the year it was put on a ship, a complex gear system allowing it to turn a wheel, allowing the ship to paddle along without the need for sail. In the next year, it was mounted on a wagon suspended above the ground on 2 tracks, the wheel now directly being used to push the locomotive forward. The age of Arcana is now firmly dead. Already pushed to obscurity after the Draconic Wars, there's simply no purpose for the arcane arts anymore. The world has entered a new age, as the world transitions to one not of Arcana, but of Mechana. Welcome, once again, to Auckton. Heyo folks, and welcome back once again to Auckton. It's been a little bit. I've been quite busy in real life this last week. I've got a job, of course, but I've also been, doing other things, other side projects, all of that good stuff. I'm not sure if it'll make it to this channel, but yeah, I have been busy. um, this episode was also really hard to make, surprisingly. Um, Auckton as a detailed series, and myself being not a detailer, it takes a long time for me to do stuff like this. Um, which, is always fun. I enjoy doing what I do, but I easily have probably around 200 or more hours sunk into Auckton. This episode alone was roughly 5 hours of raw footage, uh, which is just a lot of effort. And then once I finish this recording, I still need to add music and do final checks, audio editing, and all of that good stuff before I release it. Then it's another 30 minutes to upload it, another about hour to get it to process. And yeah, it just takes a really long time to do these videos. I wanted to do an episode of Auckton weekly, but I think it's more likely to just kind of expect that Auckton will come bi-weekly, and maybe, weekly as a treat. But yeah, what am I doing now? I've been babbling on long enough, and I'm already almost done. I'm building this sort of semi-modern, even breakwater, trying to put it in a new lighthouse, and make the large bay in the middle of Auckton, a little more sheltered. Easier for ships to navigate into, and all of that good stuff. I don't have a good lighthouse prop, so I'm having to, or asset, so I'm having to use the vanilla one, which I think, actually looks pretty good, especially from afar. And we're already done. So, in the words of Do Not Eat, I know why you're here. It's trains. Yeah, that's the thing that I'm advertising this episode. That'll probably be on the thumbnail. It's a big deal. We're getting trains. Auckton started out in prehistory. The first episode was me building, native villages and stuff like that, which they are still around. I keep neglecting them because there's really not many good assets out there. But in the south of Auckton, the largest native settlement is still around. They're doing quite well. It's just they're isolated, and yeah, they've been doing their own thing. But yeah, you saw there, that was the start of Vernon Yards. Vernon Lumber is the lumber company that I built a very, very long time ago. I think at the time maybe it was called Vermont Lumber, but I wanted to get away. I dislike having to use real names a lot of the time. So what I'm doing here is the start of the Vernon Lumber Yard as one of the main industries in Auckton, lumber, with its rich forests composed of oak, pine, and sometimes even palm. Uh, it's definitely a lucrative trade, and as a big, heavy, resource, it's difficult to just put on a normal horse wagon and ferry it wherever it needs to go. So I imagine that the lumber industry would be the first in Auckton to uh, adopt trains, especially to get things to the port more easily and more efficiently. Crops would also utilize this new burgeoning rail system pioneered by Vernon Lumber. The station I build in the rail yards is a cargo station, so the agriculture industry around Auckton could use it if they so desired. I've yet to see a train come out of that station, but it is theoretically possible, and to my knowledge, the station's not broken. So what am I doing now? After I placed down the basic couple of rails, I wanted to kind of figure out where this rail was going. Early rail systems, I did a lot of research for this episode as well to make sure this was somewhat historically accurate. Early rail systems were pretty damn dangerous. They kind of just went wherever there was public right-of-way already. And oftentimes that would mean running down streets and public thoroughfares. More on that later. But as the riverfront here is public land, it's so steep, nobody's developed it, nobody's ever claimed it from the government. So it's still held in common by the government of Auckton, the city council and whatnot. So I figured right here up on the riverfront could be this rail line, um, straddling both sides of the bank, as on one is a residential area and a line that will be used for other industries in the area later. Um, but on the other side is Vernon Lumber itself. So they're in close proximity not only to their rail yard, but also to the main line that's getting developed following this riverside. But yeah, now we're coming back to the yard itself, and I'm working on the where the trains go to sleep at night. These nodeless is a little bit of a overstatement, but these assets, or this rail network by Ronick 69, uh, is actually like really, really versatile. Uh, you are able to really manipulate the nodes and node controller really finely, which is really awesome. I'm saying really way too much here. But no, it's really great being able to pull these rails real tight. I'm going to try to stop saying really now, but yeah, you pull them in super duper close, and have some funny things happening sometimes. But yeah, you can manipulate them to where they flow very easily into one another. You see here I'm having some terrain issues, and I will continue having those terrain issues until I say screw it and just flatten everything. But it seems I didn't cut that out, which I should have. But now we're in the voiceover section, and I can't be bothered to edit it. It's 3 a.m. I finished editing this at 3 a.m. last night, and I've been driving for roughly 8 hours today. Uh, had to go somewhere and come back to my house in the same day. So, you know, the typical life of an American, I suppose. But yeah, we're finishing up the layout of the yard. I've mostly finished how I want these nodes to be set up. So now we're just making sure the terrain looks great and all of that good stuff. Adjusting the height of the rail for the station itself using Alt on your keyboard. Yeah, that's how you can select networks tied to buildings. Hold down Alt and then you can click the nodes or the segments. But yeah, now that we have the basic yard done, where the trains go to sleep at night, let's talk about where the trains go to refuel, or I suppose where the trains go to eat, if we're using the the sleep at night, idiom. But yeah, doing this little loop here for a coaling station. There's this great pack of sawmills, like sawmill and lumber assets and old rural like trains and whatnot made by, I believe their name is Evangeline on the workshop. That is where the vast bulk of these assets are coming from. This one creator, I am very, very thankful for all of the work they've done. And I definitely think that these are some of the most detailed and pretty rural assets. Technically speaking, these sorts of assets would be more at home in the early 1900s, perhaps even the mid to late 1800s, but for our purposes, I think that it can work for this time period that Auckton finds itself in. Auckton is currently only 4 years on from when the steam engine was first invented by Arthur Black. And obviously, you can see that while things are developing very, very quickly, of course, this technology is still most certainly very new. The only reason Vernon Lumber would dare to jump in on this is because it's simply much easier to transport their cargo when it's like this, or when it's on a train. It's just logistically so much easier for them. It helps with the profits, it helps with the manpower, all of that stuff. There's every incentive for Vernon Lumber to jump into this early. After all, what Auckton is going through is the Industrial Revolution. It is, in our time, probably the largest period of substantial change in history. Of course, over time, we've seen so much change, so much development. Hell, even in my lifetime, I'm only 20 years old, but like, thinking back to what things were like when I was, a toddler and how things are now, it's so radically different. But yet, within. I'm stumbling on my words here, but I guess what I'm trying to say is like, when I was young, we still had basic cell phones and the internet and things like that. And within a single lifetime of somebody living during the Industrial Revolution, you essentially went from being a peasant to being able to hop on the train to explore parts of the country that your family has never seen in centuries. That's something I think that we as humans should be proud of. Uh, this period of change, being able to unlock machinery, proper machinery for the first time using the steam engine, that was a amazing turning point in our history. Unfortunately, as we know, uh, much of this innovation was used not properly. Um, we see the drastic decline in working conditions during this time as employers begin to exploit their employees more and more for profit. Um, Of course, these tendencies have always existed in humanity. All business owners want to make more money from their business. That's just a natural drive, right? Um, but we see the standardization of a workday begin to emerge. And as a result of that, we see employers demanding their employees use all of the time dedicated to the workday for work. And sure, while this may sound great on paper, we have things happen like in our time, bathroom breaks being denied, right? But also, in our history, employers have locked doors to leave the building and barred them shut. I can't remember for the life of me what the fire itself was caused, but in New York City, or called, excuse me, but in New York City, a garment factory caught fire, and all employees inside, something like 100 or more women and other workers, all died because of a lack of an exit. The employer boarded the doors shut so nobody could leave. They were forced to work. And that's the sort of conditions that the Industrial Revolution allowed. Um, but that's neither here nor there. Let's talk about Auckton. With this world-changing technology now unlocked, uh, I wanted to revisit um, the old Vernon lumber industry. When I first built it so many episodes ago, um, I used the vanilla forestry industries, forestry buildings from the Industries DLC. I'm sorry if I'm like bumbling over myself much more than I usually do. It is 3:07 a.m. I am exhausted, but I'm ready to get this video out. I feel very proud about this video. But regardless, I originally used the Industries DLC buildings for the forestry industry when I originally built the Vernon lumber yard or lumber area. Um, it doesn't look very good. I think City's Colossal Order got much, much better at making assets for their DLCs. I think a lot of them are very pretty, and I will be using a lot of vanilla assets in the future. Um, but specifically the forestry industries buildings, they don't look good. So, again, thanks to Evangeline, we have this wonderful pack of sawmills, including, you can see there, a steam donkey. One of the, I suppose, earliest innovations when it comes to the steam engine was being able to use it for lumber. It wasn't that hard to use the rotary motion of a um, steam engine to turn a saw, which allowed planing and cutting of lumber much more easily and much quicker, which was awesome. Basically, everything in the Industrial Revolution basically supercharged the lumber industry. I live in an area very dependent on the lumber industry, and I can see firsthand how much logistics and whatnot matters to lumber companies. Uh, we have entire forests dedicated to pine plantations, uh, with hordes upon hordes of trucks ferrying lumber into lumber mills, which are then loaded on, you know, the finished lumber is loaded on trains and sent to everywhere around the country. But yeah, so it wasn't that hard to get everything there set up. It is a functional forestry industry. I temporarily also turn on some forestry industry vehicles to ensure everything works. I don't believe I have all of the vehicles necessary for this time period to allow the forestry industry to work, because, I'm not going to let a 1950s Ford drive around yet. But yeah, I also steal the technique I used with the rock face when I built Yorkford way back when. This technique I learned from Jeremy Thunder when I watched his Scylla series. Please, please go watch that. It's amazing. Um, basically, I use PO to lay these rocks how I feel uh, they should be. And then I use small bushes to cover all of the seams between the rock and the grass. Next, I use a layer of thicker bush, a little bigger one, denser one, to blend in the small bushes to the trees. Then finally, obviously, I go in with the trees as the final layer, basically creating a sort of wall of green that covers up the seam between the grass and the rock and makes for a pretty realistic and, dare I say, pretty cliff face. I do the same thing over here and just cutting ahead. Yeah, just doing the same procedure that I did earlier with this rock face. But yeah, enough about the rocks. We are moving into another very important facet of the Industrial Revolution. With the with the invention of the steam engine, we now have another extremely important mode of transportation unlocked to us. Previously, all vessels used sail. Those that didn't use sail were pretty much entirely river going vessels that were only capable of floating downstream. And most vessels that used a sail were not able to fight the current and able to go back upstream. So, with the invention of the steam engine, uh, we see the development of the first paddle steamers as river vessels. Uh, for the sake of aesthetics, and because I think they're cool, we're going to say that paddle steamers in Auckton are able to be ocean going. This will definitely allow for greater connectivity between the old and the new world, but also make Auckton far, far less isolated. As an island, it is a it is far removed really from the rest of the affairs of the mainland. However, as an economically and strategically important city in the unified provinces of Odresh, that's right, Odresh won the Brothers War, but we'll get to that in a second. Auckton is a very valuable city. So with the paddle steamer allowing for uh, easy transit across the Cardiffil Straits and pretty much anywhere else along the coastline of Odresh, it ties Auckton much, much deeper into its home country. And let's talk about that home country. Last we left off, Odresh and Andlia were fighting in the Brothers' War. The Brothers' War was for those who didn't catch the recap, was a very violent conflict over the destiny of Auckton. Auckton declared its own independence from Frostock way back in the past, and was the first Frostock colony to declare independence. Because of its insular nature, it developed a pretty distinct culture from the rest of the Frostock colonies, who had much more contact with one another. Um, so yeah, when Frostock gained independence, it, of course, as a maritime trading city-state, began to get very, very close with Odresh, who themselves had a predominant focus on naval technology. Andlia is far larger territorially, and as a result has not only a higher population, but a larger focus on a ground-based military. Um, so while in terms of sheer numbers, Andlia easily had Odresh outmatched with a larger army and overall a larger military, Odresh dominates the seas around Tarath. And though Andlia puts up a very large fight, Odresh is able to beat back the Andlian navy and prevent any naval invasion of Auckton. Um, as a result, Auckton is able to continue with its wish and unify with Odresh as it requested after both of its referendums way back when. But yeah, Auckton is certainly in flux right now. As it continues to industrialize, the agricultural sector begins to wane in importance. Of course, cotton and other crops are still extremely valuable components of Auckton's output, but with the explosion of the lumber industry, along with other manufactured goods, which we will touch on later, um, Auckton's exports have shifted dramatically over the past 5 years. While primarily what Auckton exported was cotton and other agricultural goods like fruits and vegetables, um, and while Auckton was mostly self-sufficient in terms of food production, we're seeing a dramatic shift as people begin to work in factories as the lumber industry really takes off. And we're seeing this big change in how the power dynamic of Auckton worked as well. I've mentioned this before, but the early Free State of Auckton, while nominally meritocratic, was dominated by the slaveholding plantation class. As the people with the most wealth, with the most land, these individuals were able to have the most clout, and as a result, guided the policy of the early republic or early Free State. Um, so yeah, once Auckton begins to transition into an industrial city, we see this power block wane significantly. Um, and that creates a power vacuum which needs to be filled. And we will see the effects of that very soon. But yeah, continuing on with actually what I'm doing in the episode, we are working on the new port of Auckton. Of course, the old port is still being used. It's not like sailboats have gone completely out of fashion. It's just that these steamboats are able to carry a lot of cargo and go a very long distance. Or, ferry the. They're able to cross the ocean much quicker than the sailboats would. That comes at the cost of reliability. Early steamboats were very much prone to boiler failure. Uh, the steam engine was a great boon to humanity's development. It probably wasn't ready to come out of the oven yet. A lot of early trains, a lot of early steamboats, their boilers exploded constantly. Uh, they would be burned down to the waterline along the Mississippi River in our time, but also on the Carterville Straits, as they would simply be overloaded. The steam engine would just, the pressure tank would just fail. A whole host of things could lead to the failure of the steam engine to maintain its structural integrity. So, while steam engines, or excuse me, paddle steamers are a magnificent technology and becoming widely adopted internationally, for reliability, uh, you need a sailboat. So we're in a very strong transition period where the largest of boats haven't yet been invented, but the smallest ones still maintain relevance. We're not in an age where large steamships like the Titanic or Lusitania are possible, but we still want the speed and efficiency afforded by them. So we have the ocean-going paddle steamer, apparently. Continuing along with detailing, I do my normal stuff. I detail this very similarly to how I did the shipyards in the last episode. But up here, I'm doing a couple of different industries. So that industry that I placed down that I'm actually turned into a PO to remove its props, that is a glassworks. I could remove the branding on it, but you know what? Sure, I like a glassworks. It can stay there. It's on a beach. Surely there's sand that they can turn into glass, and then it's easy to export onto the ships that are right beside them. The other two, I imagine, are perhaps furniture manufacturers or other lumber-related industries, turning the lumber produced by Vernon Lumber into processed goods that can be used domestically in Auckton, but also shipped all across Odresh and the wider world. Um, but yeah, so this port is a far cry from how the old port used to be. You see, it's specifically designed to allow uh, steamships to slip in and out of these docks, jutting out into the ocean instead of just simply going alongside the coastline. Um, and yeah, this is kind of like how I see it done in a lot of larger ports in America and Canada, and I believe this is just simply a very efficient way of constructing a somewhat modern port. It would be easy to bring materials down right to where they are being loaded up. You saw that I placed down a couple of rail lines that lead onto the jetties, and yeah, I mean, it's a modern port, modern in quotes, obviously. And then we put a couple of warehouses down on the jetties themselves, and we are moving on. Uh, I want to expand the rail line out along the coast of Auckton. Problem is, uh, this the island is pretty well developed at this point. We have towns running up and down the entire length of the coastline for the most part, especially in this northern part. Um, North Auckton is very, very heavily developed, while southern Auckton is more mountainous and rugged and hasn't gotten much development yet. But it will. It will soon. Um, we might touch on that in an episode or two. But yeah, so I'm trying to make a T intersection where that bridge is, allowing trains to cross the river. Um, and trying to negotiate this steep terrain as best as I can. It's really quite difficult, unfortunately. But yeah, we go from a double track to a single track, um, in the hopes that a single track can more realistically navigate these kinds of terrains and environments. I skipped over it earlier because I was in a bit of a rant, but early trains, like I said, really did not care where they went as long as there was already public right-of-way. So municipal municipalities and governments would simply just give railroad companies the right to build rails wherever they saw fit, so long as it was productive, if that makes sense. So they would give rail lines the right to build on public land, um, and yeah, so we end up with really weird situations in early railroads where rails would just kind of go down streets. People were expected to avoid the rails, and yeah, I mean, these places were already cleared, right, of vegetation. They were relatively easy to adapt to have rails, and it was probably the cheapest and easiest way to place down a rail line in this early age. But yeah, as a result, we see these really odd situations where the rail line just runs down a normal road. This is not a long-lived period because people pretty quickly realize that running a rail line straight down a busy avenue is deadly. So over time, the municipalities would instead just sell land somewhere else to rail developers to, develop rails. But also the avenues that have already been sold to rail developers would eventually just cease being roads and turn purely into railroads. So, as we begin to close out this episode, we finish out by finishing up the rail yards at the Vernon Yards. I fill in this development, these houses that I had tapered out in the previous episode to match the density of the area, as this area is now quickly becoming a new industrial hub, as clothing manufacturers tooling manufactories, all sorts of different companies begin to establish factories in this area, all powered by steam donkeys and new steam engines. Um, yeah, this area has easy access to a cargo station, so industries would love to set up here. But yeah, now we are doing the finishing touches, so I need to do my ad read. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. It really does bring me a lot of joy to see so much engagement and activity on my videos. Truth be told, I never thought I would get this far. I honestly thought I would get bored of this project and nobody would watch it and it'd die. I would let it die after a few episodes, but I'm loving seeing all the attention. So, please do like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. I will continue to do this series for as long as y'all continue enjoying watching it. And yeah, I also have a Discord where where you can submit your suggestions. And I also have a Patreon where you can get early access to videos and other perks such as a um, archive of all of my raw footage. Well, thank you so much for spending your time with me. I'm the Kuma Courtway, and have a good one.